Welcome to part 10, Styling with CSS. So cascading style sheets, or CSS, is a language that's used to style elements and control their position on the page. It is a completely different language and therefore uses completely different syntax than HTML. So CSS is usually written in a separate file and linked to the HTML page via the empty link attribute. So what you would do is write your CSS in some other file, say it's called style.css. And then in your HTML that you like to style with that CSS, you have this empty link element. And then you link to it like this. And you use this href attribute to say where's the location of the file. Now, CSS can also be written within the style HTML element. So you can actually do this in the same page. And that's what we're going to do here to keep it all together. It's more typical to see it linked like this, and that's what we're going to do in our actual project. But for this demonstration, it'll all appear in the same page. All right, so what is CSS and how does the syntax work? Well, CSS is composed of rules. So every component of CSS is a rule. And the way the rules work is that there's a selector, and then there's property value pairs within the selector. So it's going to look like this. You can have some selector, open curly braces, then property value pairs like this that are separated, the property values are separated by a colon, and then a semicolon ends the property value pair. And then there's a closing curly braces to end the entire rule. So the selector, this purpose is to select particular elements. So we want to select, all paragraph tags, or we want to select a particular, like these two divs. So that's what this stands for. And there's many different ways to select items. We're going to start off with a simple way down below, but that's what we do. We select an element and then we apply some style to it within the rule. Okay, let's take a look at some of the most common properties. These are these key words right here. So property 1, property 2, property 3. Here are some of these common properties, and then here are some of the values that go along with such properties. So the color property, for instance, can be mapped to one of 140 color names. And this actually changes the color of the text. And a better name for this could have been text color instead of just color. So color technically changes the text color. Text align, it manages the horizontal alignment of the text. So you can have it on the left-hand side of the page, the right-hand side of the page, in the center. You can justify so that it stretches across the page. That's what text align does. Vertical line is another CSS property to align within the particular block, the vertical alignment. Font family, font size, font weight, background color. These are all pretty self-explanatory. So all elements have some border, some box that borders them, and you can change this border. And I really like this property when first learning CSS and HTML, so you can see exactly where the border of the particular element is. This is just like knowing the borders of a state or a country, so you know right where the start and end of a particular element is. The margin is how you can increase like the very ends, the left, right, up, down margin. So whether you can push out its space between other elements. You can control the height and the width. And then you can actually change the display. So we just talked about inline and block. So you can change, elements display. If it's by default an inline element, you can change it to a block level element and vice versa. And then we'll learn about these two other displays that are very nice for creating like grids and one's called a flex box and the other is called a grid, and these are more modern types of displays and very popular amongst web developers to place different elements on their page. Okay, so let's go ahead and see how these work. We're going to create some HTML and then we're going to style them using some CSS. So let's just create some HTML right now. So we'll just say we'll create some headers. Coronavirus forecasting dashboard. So we'll make some H3 header and some paragraph element, makes predictions for cases and deaths. And we didn't finish that correctly. All right, so here's just some plain HTML without CSS. So they all have default styles that are used. So in order to make the CSS, and like I said before, typically the CSS is written in a separate file, but for now you can write it in the same file using this style element like this. So, and then you put the properties over here. Now, we have to have a way of selecting particular elements. We can't just say, I want the color to be red. Okay. You have to say which elements will this style apply to. So in order to do that, the way you write this is you say a selector. You can use the name of the tags as the selectors themselves. So if we say I want all paragraphs to be a certain style, then we use P as the selector, and all rules, the way they're written, are selector and then curly braces like this, and then we place the property value pairs inside here. So these are the common properties. We'll just go ahead and use these, and we'll say I want the color, which is really the text color of the paragraphs, to be red, and this will color all the paragraphs. And then you need to end each each property value pair with a semicolon. So the colon separates the property name and the value. You can put a space there to separate it further, and it needs the CSS rules need to be placed within this style element. So let's go ahead and render this, and we can see that now the text color has changed. Let's go ahead and set many different properties here. We could say the font size. We can make this larger. We can say we want it to be 25 pixels, like that. So we made it larger. It can certainly be larger than the header. That doesn't matter just because it's a paragraph. We can make it as large as we want. We can make it 250. It would be a very, enormous, font size. So there's no limit there. Let's go ahead. Let's look at some of the other ones over here. We could change the font weight. So you have to know what the values are. And if you look at the MDN docs, you'll see all of the possible values for each of the properties. I've put some notes over here. So you can give it some word over here for font weight. You can also just give it some number. So we can weight it up between 0 and 1,000. That's what we have over here. It's the boldness of the font. So let's say we want it to be, 750. This will make it bold. We can also change the, say, background color to another one of those 140 colors. And what you can see here is that the width of the element, so I talked about this in one of the previous videos. So for these block level elements, and paragraph is a block level element, and so is header elements, they stretch from the left side of the screen all the way to the right side. In this case, it's just the parent, which we're inside of a Jupyter notebook, so it goes the full length of the cell. That's what I was talking about. Even though the element, the content ends right here, technically the element is as wide as the parent. And some easier way to see this is with this border property. And the way the border property works is actually you set 3 properties at the same time: the width, the style, and the color. So if we make a 2-pixel border that is dashed, and say it is blue, and we run that, and I really like setting the border of elements so you can see exactly where they are on your page, like where do they extend to. That's one of my favorite things to do when building web applications, is to put borders around things so I know exactly where they are. Okay, so that's setting the style. We can also do so for the H3 element. So we have to use its name precisely. It's H3, not just H. So we're going to use that as the selector. And this will select all H3s. And let's say we want to center the text. So instead of just having it left aligned, which is default, we'll say text align, and we will say center. And that will have the effect of centering this. And like we did with the paragraph, let's go ahead and place a border around it. We do the same thing. Like that. So we can see that it does, in fact, extend all the way across the parent on its own line. Okay, so that is an introduction to CSS and the rules. So everything in CSS is a rule. You have a selector, then within the selector you have property value pairs like this. So we're going to learn about different ways of selecting different elements. All right, so that's our intro to styling with CSS.